Who am I? Well, I was referred to as the man who had it all in my 20s. Before life threw me a curveball, I was really living a life in the fast lane. And I think that you recognize the same sort of life. I had an exciting career in tourism, and it literally took me all over the world, from Brussels to Havana, LA to Bangkok,
Mm.
a new adventure every day in the dynamics of tourism. Now, on the outside, it looked like I had it all together. I was always moving, always achieving. My calendar was crammed like a suitcase before a long trip. And people said that I seemed unstoppable. And honestly, I started to believe that. But what I didn't realize back then is how little time I spent actually listening to myself, pausing, inner peace. Back then, I thought they were just things that you could read in an airport bookshop.
Marcel Vogeli is working on translations of Christiane Beerlandt's book, The Key to Self-Liberation. It's not a political book. The book provides in-depth explanations of the psychological, emotional undercurrents of over 1,000 diseases and their symptoms. The purpose of the book is to enhance personal growth and awareness. It's a fascinating approach to understanding our bodies, our health, and ourselves, and in every case, the power to heal lies within. This is a terrific discussion. It's empowering. Come join us. Marcel, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Hi, Pat. Thank you so much for your welcome, for your heartfelt warm welcome. And I'm really excited to be with you, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. Who am I? Well, I was referred to as the man who had it all in my 20s. Before life threw me a curveball, I was really living a life in the fast lane. And I think that you recognize the same sort of life. I had an exciting career in tourism, and it literally took me all over the world, from Brussels to Havana, LA to Bangkok,
Mm.
a new adventure every day in the dynamics of tourism. Now, on the outside, it looked like I had it all together. I was always moving, always achieving. My calendar was crammed like a suitcase before a long trip. And people said that I seemed unstoppable. And honestly, I started to believe that. But what I didn't realize back then is how little time I spent actually listening to myself, pausing, inner peace. Back then, I thought they were just things that you could read in an airport bookshop. Now, while I was traveling, um, I experienced a lot. I enjoyed life, but what I didn't see coming was that life had other plans for me. First, I had a serious car accident in Turkey, sudden, unexpected, and was one of those moments where you know everything froze in life. Everything came to a stop. And I was quite stubborn at the time. I was going on and I thought, well, I'll recover. I had a broken back.
Ooh.
I was getting ready to get back on the next plane to a new destination, a new adventure. And then all of a sudden, an aggressive autoimmune disease hits, an ankylosing spondylitis, which
Oh.
means on my spine started growing altogether. A little bit the same story like yours. Medical doctors kept me. They told me it would be better not to go on in my life in tourism. And that made me think everything that made up my life, the work, the travel, even the sense of myself at that time, it suddenly vanished. And I went from being, that guy on the go to just being. I saw hospitals. I stayed in bed, stuck with way too much time to think. And to be very honest, it was rough. There were days that I felt completely lost. I felt like I hadn't just lost my health, but my entire identity, just like you described, also in Bump in the Road. Now, then I began to question, who am I? Who am I really? Uh, when all the noise dies down. And, um, right at that moment, life unfolded a secret beauty before me. And I could only recognize that because everything else had been stripped away. I was wandering through a bookstore in Ghent, here in Belgium, and I stumbled on Christiane Beerlandt's The Key to Self-Liberation, the book which I will show you right here. I started reading it, and I realized after I found my disease described in the book that actually my body wasn't betraying me. And maybe it was just begging me to listen. And that perspective was actually revolutionary for me. And for the first time, I started to see illness, my disease, not as bad luck or punishment, but actually as a kind of a wake-up call. And that changed my life. In the beginning, I started paying attention to my own thoughts, my habits, also the way how I had pushed myself for years, and it wasn't easy at all, but it was also strangely freeing, liberating. And instead of fighting my situation like I did before when I was in tourism all the time fighting and trying to achieve, I started asking what I could learn from that.
That's a profound shift.
That is, and I think you recognize that when you're coming into this black hole that all of a sudden the world stops and then you're just asking, what am I doing here?
Well, we were talking before we started recording about how these sorts of health bumps can really cause you to redefine your path in life because they force you to redefine your very identity.
Actually, they force you to use the word force, which I don't like because I think everything flows naturally in life. But in a certain way, it shows you a way to your authentic self, to who you really are in the core. And I think as humans, as we all are in our present state of evolution, we all want to conform to society. We all want to achieve goals. It starts in school. You have to, when I grow up, I will be this, or you have to be that, or you have to be polite. One of the beautiful examples, which Christiane Beerlandt is also telling me or told in her book and during talks, was a very simple example. We are so used when we are invited somewhere and we're sitting there and actually we don't like it. Now, we have all been taught to, sit still, be polite, and, wait until everybody start leaving and saying, thank you very much, it was fun, and see you next time. But if you are really honest and authentic to yourself, you should be able to just, when you're sitting there and you feel that this is not the right vibration or the right moment, so to speak, for you, or that you feel uncomfortable for what reason soever, that you should be able to be honest with yourself, and get up with respect to the others and say, well, I'm sorry, I have to go. Have a pleasant night, have a pleasant, stick together, but I'm leaving. And that is also to start being true to your authentic self. And that requires also sometimes breaking the patterns, breaking old habits. And I believe that is just a small part on how transformation works.
Back up a little bit and talk about Christiana and who she is and why she's important.
Yeah, well, Christiane is very important to me also in first place because she literally made me heal through her book, through her texts. Now, as I told you that one day when I came across her book, The Key to Self-Liberation, I read the text and it struck me. Now, what I've done, just like everybody else, the book contains two parts, an introduction part, which contains her life philosophy, and a whole encyclopedic work on all the diseases and illness which she has written down. Now, many years later, I had the honor of meeting Christiane and her life companion, Dr. Lippens, Dr. Dirk Lippens, and we had immediately a very good connection. And I started working with them. So I worked for about 2 years together with Christiane. Now, Christiane is or was, because she has left us. She has left the three-dimensional world 10 years ago. Christiane had an ability to feel into the psycho-emotional patterns of people. Not only that, but she had the ability to connect to what she referred to as the frequency of truth,
Wow.
which is maybe a very new concept, but actually it is something which we can all connect to. If you would say pure consciousness, you're an example. Who, as a child, didn't go sometimes into the kitchen and steal a cookie? We all felt at that moment that even though we were looking forward to eating that, chocolate chip cookie or any cookie, we knew it was wrong. And that is actually also a sort of connection to the frequency of truth. Now, she didn't do it on this, child way, but she had the ability to connect and actually call for the information which she was asked for. And maybe this is very interesting to tell you also on how the book was written. All in the beginning, Christiane helped people. Just people came up to her and they said, "Well, I'm suffering from this or that disease or that pain," and she would just explain. And later on, she started writing. Now, the more people came to her, of course, she had more and more texts until one day she met up with Dr. Lippens, her later life companion, who um, who was a medical doctor who could definitely understand the value of her texts for his patients. Because as a doctor, he looked at it from a different perspective. He saw that some patients were healing easily and others had problem healing for the same disease or the same ailment. Now, when he used those texts and he let these texts read to their patients, somehow the patients got their insight on like, okay, well, this is on a psycho-emotional way level is blocking me from healing or is creating or let's say is the origin of my disease or illness. So when he understood the value of the text, he decided to stop with his medical practice and start a publishing house. And later on, they became life companions. And After that, only the key to self-liberation, which is now translated in Dutch. Christian has written over 20 years, more than 22 books on all different life events in Dutch. And that can be on a symbolical meaning of an animal encounter. What does it mean if you see, for instance, a mouse? What does it mean, for instance, if you're having a food craving? And she has written a whole book on food stuff, on the symbolic meanings on food stuff. For instance, if you have a craving for a tomato,
Hmm.
who doesn't have that sometimes? That is actually, and it's not the tomato itself, it's the symbolism behind it. It's like what if you feel like you want this eat this tomato, actually it is a message from within showing you, telling you like, speak up, speak out, don't keep it inside. And she has written a whole book, you can say almost the same size, like the key to self-liberation and all different food stuff. Now, how did she get this information? She wrote every question on a piece of paper. She folded it and she put it all together. Later, she picked one piece of paper and without looking at it, she held it in her hand. She felt, and this feeling it was not channeling, but she could connect to this frequency of truth as she described. She closed her eyes, this is true, and she started writing what she felt. And after she had finished her text, she would open up the little note and see what the question was and then write it as a title. And this is how, as said, over a course of 20 years, she has written over 22 books. And I know that there is still some manuscripts on the shelf which will be published. But again, from a philosophical perspective, we do believe that everything comes at the right time. So even when it's not published yet, and even I haven't seen those texts yet, I believe that when the time is ripe, when the time is right for people to read it, it will be published. And that was Christiane. She had this amazing ability.
Now that is really interesting. What going back to your spine injury, and this also goes to Christiane's ability to read into things. What did
Yes.
what did you need to learn from that, do you think, in retrospect?
Well, I can tell you actually not in retrospect. And I'm going to be very honest and open about myself. If I would open now the page in which she has described a sentence, which at that moment I remember it struck me when I read that sentence, and I'm taking the book here, and she has written here this one sentence which completely resonated with me, and that was transform aggression into creativity. Now, in my job, in when I was in my 20s, you could say there was a certain form of aggression, and aggression doesn't mean always evil.
Mhm.
Aggression is also some, you can say some power which you want to let out, and aggression is mostly connected to a negative outcome, but aggression can lead to creativity.
Hmm.
It's the same with anger. If you're anger, or you're destroying, or you're building up something from this anger. It depends on how you use this energy. And I had at that moment, when I was very honest, there was this sort of aggression inside me, this energy which was blocked, which I had blocked inside myself. And once I get that insight, I could let it flow. And then, of course, I could pull it into a creativity. I started to become more creative. I started, writing letters again. I started expressing myself because expressing yourself in words, even speaking out, like the tomato craving, for instance, is also a form of creativity. And after a while, I had to go back to the hospital and they wanted to give me some. I was under medication also. Every 6 to 8 weeks, I had to go to hospital for an IV cure. And I remember after 8 years, the doctor wanted to give me something stronger. And I was saying, well, I was 35 at the time. I was saying, if every 5 years they're going to give me something stronger, I don't know if I will reach 70.
Yeah.
And by that time, I had read The Key to Self-Liberation, and it was all in the beginning when I met Christiane. And the information which I got, which could finally feel, because you can read the book, and a lot of people who are not, to say, ready for the book, they will read the text and they will say, oh, well, it all looks the same. But when you start reading it from your inner core, from your soul, so to speak, with feeling and in feeling, and you know that you should not approach it from an idea of guilt or blame, but that you know that those texts have been passed on through Christian from this frequency of truth in love and from love to you, to a person, to a human being, then you know that this information is there to help you lovingly. And reading, rereading, trying to understand word by word what she had written down is started my transformation process. I started looking different at the world. And I can tell you, over the last 15 years, I didn't go to any hospital anymore.
That's really interesting. I did something, as you know, similar, and I just kind of
Exactly.
walked away from allopathic medicine. And it has its place, don't get me wrong, but
Mhm.
it doesn't address the energy of healing.
Exactly. And I think this is a very important remark. If we're talking about synchronicity, the fact that two things can happen at the same time and that they're interconnected. I and Christiane was never against classical medicine. She said also that just the fact that we are now living in the 21st century, where medical science has also evolved, and the fact that this medication is there to support us, it buys us time to
Hmm.
work on ourselves.
Oh, that's an
So
interesting perspective.
it is, you know, you can be against medicine, about medication, and say, okay, well, it's chemicals and you shouldn't take it. And from a certain perspective, you can say, okay, right, it's plausible. But from the other side, it is there to help us also. And I know there's a whole pharma which is making millions of dollars. But on the other side, the fact that we are not dying from the flu anymore today because of medication, it buys us time to finally understand the origin of flu and to work on that so we can transform, we can evolve as human beings. So that is the synchronicity. And that is also another thing why we can look at things like, and that may be also very strange in our present day world, if you would say there is no good and bad.
Oh, it's all a
And
spectrum.
exactly. And Christian describes this as a counterforce.
That's interesting. I kind of look at it from the perspective of, we let's just call it good and bad for the sake of discussion.
Mhm. Yeah.
Good is one side of the spectrum, bad is the other side. The wider your range of experiences, I think the greater the depth of your understanding. And it's experiential. And there's a lot to be said for that. And I think that as your experience level widens and widens, you have a chance to escape that duality and see it from a more integrated perspective and realize it's just shades of gray. It's not, don't judge it. It just is. And that moves you towards that greater spirit of unity, if you will, when you can start to remove yourself from um, polar opposites in terms of judging things.
Yes. If we leave out the judging things,
Yeah.
then we can understand that, these are, like you're saying, they're polars, and which is, let's say, light or good from one perspective can be bad from another perspective. But the fact is,
Yeah.
there's this interaction which shows that, and that is also how many people, and I think we were once one of them, when we were diagnosed with our disease, we thought, oh my God, this is bad. But in
Yeah, it was not
retrospect,
perceived as good at the time.
at the time, right? But if we look at it now in retrospect, we can say it without that disease, we would be still running around like, like crazy, stressed out in a job that was completely eating us. So from a different perspective and in retrospect, because time is also a factor, we can look at it from a different way and say, okay, well, in a certain way, you can say, I was grateful for for those circumstances, that the fact that I caught that disease, which at the end, according to Christiane Beerlandt, you are in a certain way attracting to yourself or creating inside yourself as a signal from your body telling like, oh, stop, you're on the wrong way. And if you're looking at that way, it's a message.
Yeah. What were the messages regarding your spinal surgery? What were the things that you needed to look at in your life?
Well, first and for all, like I said, the aggression was very important.
Yeah.
And the other thing, and this is also related to spine, is to work on your column, and a spine as being a symbol for this column inside your the column inside your body, but also in your life. Make this strong column, which is the fundament of your being. And in other words, is like believe in yourself, trust in yourself, and be authentic. You're good as you are.
I think learning authenticity is part of our journey. I mean, I say this a lot, but I look at it as we spend the first half of our lives having all these expectations, and material desires and everything else heaped upon us. And if we're lucky, we get to spend the second half of our life peeling it all back to figure out who we really are.
That's beautiful, isn't it?
The figuring out who you really are piece is very important. And there's an energy that goes with it, which coincides with everything you're saying, an energy of truth. And when you know that, when you feel it and experience it, nothing else will do.
If I would ask you, what is being authentic, an authentic self, what would that mean to you?
Philosophically or practically? Yes.
How it feels, how it would feel. Because philosophically is also one side, it's trying to rationalize on what you're feeling. But if I would ask you, if I would ask you, how would you feel in from this feeling understanding, not by the heart, by the head understanding, but I cannot put it in different words. And that's also the way how you're reading the key to self-liberation. If you're reading it pure rationally, you will not understand. But if you're reading it from heart, from your feeling, and it's on that level, I would like to ask you, how would you feel what the meaning of authentic self would be?
Um, Steady, straight, joyous, happy, energetic, curious, present. Those are some of the words that come to mind quickly.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful and it's authentic.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. You look at your life and you look at all these things people say that leave such an impact on you, and it's just one perspective, one voice that really has no right to leave that sort of imprint on your soul, and yet it does. And it takes us so long to just rid ourselves and to realize that these perspectives have nothing to do with us. They are the projection of somebody who probably feels insecure about themselves.
It's the projection which is touching you. When you see or you perceive the projection, that means that actually there is also something inside you which
Yeah, which is receptive to it.
is receptive to that energy. Because there's also something, if you would stand next to someone who doesn't have any issues with that thing, so to speak, and you would feel that projection, and the person next to you would say, "Oh, well, I didn't notice that." That depends. Actually, you can say it's a projection, but that's because your perception.
Very
So
true.
that means there's something inside you why you are getting an emotion to that irritation, anger, fun.
Oh, I have a great story about that. That's just so on the money. I'd made a commitment to buy my sailplane. It was a 15-meter plane, right? And it was going to be delivered shortly. And I went up to an airport on the Appalachian Ridge, which is a really popular airport for soaring, because when a weather front came in, you'd get that rush, that energy of the weather front against the Appalachian Ridge, and you can travel long distances at high speeds. It's really cool. I think the record is something like from New York down to Alabama, like 1,000 miles or something like that. It's really outrageous. Now, I wasn't doing anything that outrageous, but I was ridge flying and it was really cool. And it was such a violent day with all this wind that they actually closed the airport after I took off. So I went, I flew, I had fun, I came back, I nailed my landing. I'm getting ready to pay the bill. And the gentleman, and I use the term very loosely, who owned the airport came up to me and he said, "You're buying Monty's plane, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You're going to kill yourself in that plane." And all of a sudden, all this um, uh, sense of capability that I had worked so hard to build up absolutely drained out of me. I mean, I almost couldn't stand. And I went over to the Coke machine and grabbed a Coke. I never drink Coke. I hate this stuff, but I needed that like sugar sustenance. And
Mhm.
I left with my tail between my legs. And there were some guys who'd been flying that day also who were out in the parking lot and they said, "Ignore him. He's an idiot. Come have dinner with us." And I was just like so shaken up. I couldn't do it. And I got home and there were like three messages on my machine. The soaring community is a small community. And they were all saying, "He's an idiot. Don't pay any attention to him. You're a good pilot. Don't worry about it." But that had so shaken me because, of course, underneath it all, I was still like, can I really do this? Can I fly this plane? There's a single seat high plane, a high performance plane that I've never flown before. I've never even sat in the thing before. And I'm supposed to fly this. I'm supposed to fly with these guys who fly in all these contests and, compete for places on the world team. I thought like it shook me to my core. And unfortunately at the time, I overcame it through just going out and flying well and learning to fly very well. But there was that little bit of voice stuck with me for many, many years. And I wasn't the only one he had done this to. He regularly did this to lots of people. So he had an issue in doing this kind of thing. But I wish my perception could have been different at the time. It wasn't. So that wouldn't have stuck with me so painfully.
Yeah. And if you would look at that from a perspective from Christiane Beerlandt, you would say that is a perfect scene where you can see how a signal from life itself, and
Mhm.
then you have the poles again, the man who's probably projecting because there's some fear or jealousy or any other
Oh, no, you know what
emotion.
it was? He's essentially a used car salesman. He wanted to
Okay.
he wanted to make the commission selling me a plane and he didn't get it. That was part of the
Okay.
motivation.
Okay. Well, there was an emotion behind it, but he was projecting it.
Yes.
And while he was projecting it, it touched your uncertainty, which
Oh.
was already unconsciously inside you. And then you can say from the whole, you can say the signal there was, from life to you, the message was be more sure of yourself, believe in yourself, which you did at the end.
But that made it so much harder. That was really a very difficult situation for me. But now, in retrospect, looking at it, I can see when similar things come up, they don't bother me. I don't allow them to. I don't allow them to, that energy to attach to me. As a matter of fact, I feel really strongly about keeping any sort of negative energy out of my life and living in what I call my happy bubble. But my happy bubble is a pretty nice place to be.
And that's also part of your authentic self.
Absolutely. And I think part of your authentic self too, for all of us, is finding purpose and finding something that drives you. I think purpose is a really important piece of this whole equation called life. And I'm not, how do you think people find purpose?
I believe that's also very personal to start with.
Sure.
If you know that every human being is unique, then every purpose is unique because everybody feels it indifferently. You see this a lot with people. Some people, their purpose of life is just watching TV all day, and they're
Oh,
happy.
I
Who
think
are
that's
we? Who are we to say, well, you shouldn't? Because if that person is happy and that's his purpose of life, it's not up to us to judge. But for me, the purpose of life is actually life itself. And if I can go a little bit more philosophical, and if I follow the philosophy of Christiane Beerlandt, which I'm completely standing behind, I'm advocating for. Her idea is by the key to self-liberation. Once we understand, and you see, it's a very thick book. It
mhm.
contains more than 1,000 diseases. Once that we, as human being, but as a single human being, as an individual, but also as humankind, are able to understand the deeper origins of all disease, then there's only one disease left, and that's death.
Oh, I don't think of death as a disease, though. I would say it's a portal.
Yeah, that's true. That's what the well, that's another belief which is also inside. But if you are really going deeper into the idea behind the key to self-liberation and the idea of what is life, and I'm not saying that we are all going to succeed to live forever, but at this moment, but once when we are going to evolve as human beings, that we can say, look, the purpose of life is life itself. And that is basically also what life is something which is inside us. I'm always telling to people, how do you define life? How can you feel life? And it's very easy. Just be, sit, relax for a moment, and be aware that you can breathe, that you can smell, that you can taste, that you can see. The fact that you are aware of all the senses is actually also a confirmation of the fact that there's life inside you. And if you're going deeper inside you, and you can feel emotions and you can feel feelings. And a lot of people confuse emotions and feelings as well.
How would you distinguish between them?
Um, well, really, feeling is, and it's very difficult to put that in words, even in Dutch, is something that, for instance, if when you're looking at the sunset, a beautiful sunset, you're just observing the sunset and you're feeling happy, joyful. There's no reason you cannot explain, and that is a feeling. Now, on the other side, if there's a beautiful partner next to you and you're in love, then that's an emotion because then it's the combination of the beautiful sunsets, the romantic scenery, and the fact that you're attracted to that person, then you have this emotion. And that is, of course, a positive description. And you can also put that in negative description, like when you have a beautiful sunset and you're sitting let's say, in a hotel somewhere on a beautiful resort, and somebody is taking your towel, then there's another emotion coming up. But what I'm trying to tell is the difference between the feeling of observing the sunset and what it does to you, or when something is, so to speak, triggering an emotion. And most of the time, that emotion is already something which is inside you that is, bothering you. But that's again is a signal of life, like there's something to be resolved within.
Do we need to learn to be still in this life in order to start distinguishing between what is, poking at us and prompting us versus our inner reality?
Um, if we are talking about poking, we're most of the time thinking about somebody next to us poking us.
Yeah. But I mean, it could be metaphorically somebody trying to
Metaphorically, but
find you. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, even metaphorically. But what I want to say is that when we're putting it this way, we're putting it outside ourselves. That somebody or something outside of us is doing something to us, which, in our words, in our perception, is causing why we are reacting.
Or if we choose to react. And I think
If we choose to react, exactly, and that's the difference.
yeah, no, I agree. I think learning to choose your reactions is very important. I also think that learning to choose your reactions, you have to first find some degree of stillness so that these external stimuli don't don't impact you. I mean, you just let them flow by you, let them go, and decide how you're going to handle the situation.
If you're not doing it empathically, when you're feeling, and again, then there's this emotion which you're ignoring. But if you can be in a state that you're saying, well, there is this fuzz around me, and I accept the fuzz how it is without this emotion, I agree with you. Because then it doesn't mean it triggers an emotion. But once when you're saying, oh, well, I'm ignoring my emotion, I'm staying in stillness, but deep inside you're going, "Ah," then there's still something to be resolved.
I have a good story for that one too. I'll make it brief, but it really does illustrate how you can make choice. And that is, I came back from tennis one day, and there was water in my front yard. It was like mid-thigh deep. It was really deep. And I'm like, what is going on? And it turned out my neighbor's irrigation system had busted. So I turned off the water at the street, knocked on their door. They were seemed to be home, but they didn't answer. Left a note. Went back to my place, wondering what am I going to do? I have to talk to them. You know, they have to come out sooner or later. And in a while, there's a knock on the door, and it's the husband next door who I've never met one on one. I've seen them, but I've never met them. And I open the door, and he's there with one of his big thug kind of buddies, and he starts screaming at me. And I'm like, I'm just watching this. He's just screaming at me. And I'm thinking, you just flooded underneath my house. Who knows how much damage you've caused? Who knows what mold is in there now is an issue. And you're screaming at me. So I did nothing. I'd been meditating for a long time at this point. So I just stayed still and I let him scream and scream and scream. And the energy just went flowing right around me. I didn't accept any of it. And the quieter I got, the more he screamed until the point that his buddy stopped and looked at him like he was crazy, which of course I think he was. And I said, well, at first, let's get some information. And he starts screaming again. Anyway, you can see that this is where this is going. But
Exactly.
the point was that because I was able to muster that stillness that for me I find in meditation, and now has become a big part of me. I was able to make a choice in that circumstance. And I think learning to make those choices, whatever the situation is, that momentary pause before you just react is so important. And I wish we would teach it because it's a totally learnable skill.
Yes, it is. And I think what you're in your example, in your story, what is important is the fact that you were at that moment, you were fully aware in consciousness. It is not just an exploding emotion or counter emotion or, where things explode, but
No,
you consciously understand where you are. Well, and this is also what you were asking to me. I was lacking this column, this spine, and this is why I had the spine problem before. Now I also recognize exactly what you're saying, that this being strong inside yourself, faithful to yourself, to your authentic self. And then indeed, as you're saying, you had this choice, but you made it very consciously. And that is so important because by doing so, you started actually creating a counterforce, a silent counterforce, but the energy was there because he got more and more upset. He got angry until actually everybody goes like, okay, well,
but I think your point about being faithful to yourself is so important.
it is. It
And
is.
if we could be faithful to ourselves from the time we were little kids, oh, the world would be so different.
And that's what we can work to.